This is Rediffusion, broadcasting on the London station of the Independent Television Authority.
In 1955, there was no commercial television. BBC was dominant and nobody could advertise anything. And then commercial television came along in the shape of a company called Associated Rediffusion. And I was very lucky to be asked to be the chairman of the first ever commercial television show. That building was very significant for me. It used to be the Air Ministry in Kingsway, and I had gone there as a young Air Training Corps cadet to volunteer for the Royal Air Force. But now, in 1955, it had been converted into television studios. The first company to have commercial television in this country was a huge occasion. They were called Associated Rediffusion. That was in September 1955. It started on a Tuesday night, but there were just various programs, no series. The first ever series was called Focus on Hocus, and I was asked to be the chairman of it. It was a magical program with different magicians, and I had to not only introduce them, but I had to perform 3 different routines in every show. We had 6 episodes, 6 weeks, and 3 shows each. It's quite a lot of routine that I had to come up with. They told me they will also need an announcer, and they suggested a young man called David Jacobs. Now, he was unknown, I'd never heard of him, and I sort of objected and said, no, let's get somebody more experienced. And they said, well, he's done a lot of Radio Luxembourg, and I'm sure he'll be all right. Well, of course he was. Not only was he all right, he was fantastic.
Hello and welcome to Primetime. I trust that you've been able to avoid the flu. If you've got it, or perhaps are just getting over it, keep warm and get well soon.
He just announced the shows and introduced me, but then he became very famous in his own right as a disc jockey and a very popular television personality. And he used to joke, because we became firm friends, he always used to joke saying, this is a man that nearly cost me my career, because I said I wanted something more famous. As usual, the company wanted some glamour on the show. Well, I had just become engaged to my fiancée, Ruth, and she was an actress and a model and very glamorous, so I suggested that she would be one of the girls to assist in the show, and they accepted that, but they wanted a second girl. And by the way, Ruth has now been my wife for 62 years. I always tell her it's a trial marriage just to keep on her toes. And the other girl that they engaged through a model agency was a young girl called Jackie Collins. Yes, the Jackie Collins. Of course, she became very famous as an authoress, published numerous books. And when I spoke to Joan, her sister, many years later, and reminded her that she'd help me on the show, she said no, she would never have done that, but of course she was, and Joan just didn't want to admit it. Of course, up to that time, the BBC was dominant on television, and there was no advertising. In fact, we couldn't even visualize having advertising on television. It was an American thing, but never done in this country. So Associated Rediffusion were the first company to have advertising before, during and after each program. And it was a novelty, but under strict rules that none of us could mention any brand names. Well, there were ways of getting around that. A company called Regulite approached me and said, could you possibly put one of our products, a new lamp called Regulite, in the background somewhere so it can be seen on television? I said I would do better than that. I'll create a routine where I can actually feature the lamp. And that's what I did. The Regulite lamp had a distinctive shape. It was a coolly shaped shade. It was a triangular base, a circular stand with a knob on. And when you turn that knob, you got 4 different light settings. And now we have dimmers, of course, but in those days it was a novelty. And I actually demonstrated the lamp by saying, look, this is a very bright room light. If you're watching television, you can turn it down to this strength. And as I said, I looked at the camera and I said, you should be using one now. And then if you wanted a dimmer light, you can turn it down 1 notch more. And if you needed a night light for a children's bedroom, for instance, you can turn it down. So I was actually demonstrating and doing a sales pitch on the lamp, which really wasn't allowed. But I didn't mention the name and I didn't mention the price. But the company very cleverly took a half-page ad in the Evening Standard and the Evening News, the 2 newspapers that were current at the time, as well as the Radio Times, so people would recognize the shape of that lamp and they could see the name and the price. So that was one of the ways we got round advertising. Well, to come back to the routine, I had a little gimmick in the show. I had 3 volunteers for every routine from different professions. For instance, 3 bank managers, 3 plumbers, whatever. On this particular show, I used 3 ambulance drivers. I got one of the ambulance drivers to sit in a chair, which looked very strange. It was insulated with foam rubber. He was getting a bit nervous. I then unplugged the lamp from the mains and plugged it into 2 electrodes made of copper, which I asked him to hold in each hand. He was getting more nervous. I said, look, there's no other connection to the mains. Just hold these copper wires and I'm going to get you to concentrate and to prove that the brain can actually create electricity. And the harder you think, the more electricity will flow, and there's a possibility that you might be able to light up the lamp. Well, he looked very doubtful, as did the rest of the audience. Then I said, but in order to concentrate, I want you to visualize something. And I unfurled a cloth from a table and showed him lots of small objects, maybe 25 or 30 small objects. I said, look at those and just choose any one. Just think of one. He looked, he chose one. He said, I've got one. I said, all right. Which one have you chosen? He said, oh, the egg. I said, oh, the egg in the cup. No, not the cup, just the egg. I see. Well, I took his tablecloth and covered all the objects again. Then I asked him to visualize what he was thinking of the egg, as if he could see it inside the light bulb. And then I got him to hold the electrodes and I started giving him suggestions. I said, visualize the egg in the light bulb really hard. Visualize it, and as I said that, a weird kind of electronic music started playing in the background. And the more I said it to him, the more he was concentrating. He was beginning to sweat, and I was more persuasive, and the music got louder, and I said, keep thinking of the egg inside the bulb, just imagine it, use your imagination, louder and louder, and suddenly the bulb lit up, just a little bit. And he immediately dropped the electrodes. And I said, oh, you did fantastically well. Try it again, but keep hold of the electrodes. So he gripped them again. By now he looked really convinced. And once again, I persuaded him to think of the bulb and the egg inside the bulb. He kept on and on and on. And suddenly the light grew lighter, brighter, much brighter. And as it reached its peak, he dropped the electrodes, slumped, and looked absolutely exhausted. And he wasn't acting. He really had been concentrating, listening to my suggestions. And I said, well, that's really amazing. Let's have a look at the objects. I took the tablecloth and unfolded, and to everyone's surprise, the egg had gone. All the other objects were still there, but the egg had gone. I said, you know, if we've done this successfully, that egg will be somewhere, and I think it might be in the bulb. Of course, nobody believed me, so I went under the shade. The bulb was still a bit hot. I took my hand out so people could see my hand was empty. I then unscrewed the bulb, put it on the table, gave it a little rattle, put it in a cellophane bag. In those days we didn't have polythene. Cellophane bag, took a little hammer, smashed the glass open, and you could see straight away inside the bulb was the egg. I then took the egg out of the bag, cracked it into glass to prove it was a real egg. And that's a little bit of electronic magic.